They called him a man of God, a man whose prayers could heal the sick and whose words could calm troubled hearts. Every Sunday, his voice echoed across the village, and people traveled from far and near just to sit under his teaching. To many, he was a shepherd guiding lost sheep back to safety. But behind the robes, behind the loud hallelujahs, there was a story that no one dared to whisper. What he did in secret would shake the very trust of the people who followed him. Tell me, how do you know when holiness is real, and when it is only a mask? How can you tell the difference between the man who truly carries the light, and the one who only wears it like clothing? This is the story of the most dangerous pastor's crime. In the village of Omote, respect was not given lightly. To earn it, a man had to prove himself over and over again, through kindness, through wisdom, and through strength. But Pastor Kalechi needed no proving. From the first day he arrived, people said his tongue carried fire. His sermons stirred hearts, and his prayers seemed to carry answers straight from heaven. Mothers brought their sick children to him, believing his touch carried healing. Traders came to him before journeys, asking for blessings that their goods would sell. Even the elders, men who normally trusted no one, bowed their heads when he walked by. To some, he was a gift from God. To others, he was a mystery they dared not question. His church grew faster than anyone could have imagined. In just a few months, a small gathering under a mango tree became a hall overflowing with men and women. Farmers gave portions of their harvests as offerings, widows offered their last coins, and young men pledged their loyalty to him as if serving him was the same as serving God himself. They trusted him with their lives, their money, and their deepest secrets. Wives confessed to him what they never told their husbands. Husbands leaned on him for advice in times of weakness. People gave him the keys to their homes, believing that a man so holy could never misuse such trust. But every story has corners the eye cannot see. In the evenings, when the villagers rested from their labor, some said they saw Pastor Kalechi wandering alone, his footsteps leading into the forest. At first, they thought it was prayer after all. A man of God often seeks solitude. But the more often they noticed, the heavier the whispers became. "Why does a shepherd walk without his flock?" one woman asked quietly. An elder, his voice slow with age, only replied, "A masquerade may cover its face, but its steps will reveal the truth." Still, no one dared to question the pastor openly. They swallowed their doubts, convincing themselves that holiness sometimes wears strange garments. After all, was it not his prayers that brought rain in a season of drought? Was it not his words that had healed the lame boy from the next village? Yet, even as praises rose higher, a shadow of unease moved quietly among the people. And though no one wanted to admit it, some hearts had already begun to wonder if the man they called anointed was truly what he claimed to be. At first, the signs were small, almost invisible. Pastor Kalechi began to ask the widows for more than prayers. He told them that if they truly wanted God's protection, they must sow seeds far greater than the little they gave. Some sold their goats, others sold their last pieces of land. He promised them that heaven would repay every sacrifice, but the harvest never came. He told the youth that loyalty was the highest form of faith. They carried his Bible, washed his clothes, and followed him like shadows. To him, obedience was no longer a choice, it was proof of salvation. Those who hesitated were warned, to resist the man of God is to resist God himself. And who among them would dare to challenge such a claim? Yet there were whispers. A widow complained that she had given everything, yet her children still went hungry. A young man questioned why his devotion seemed to enrich only the pastor while his own family struggled. But questions were dangerous. Anyone who spoke against him was called cursed. He would raise his voice and declare, "Touch not the anointed, or the hand of judgment will strike you down." And in a land where fear of God was stronger than fear of death, such words silenced many tongues. Still, unease continued to grow. In the marketplace, women spoke in hushed tones. At the river, Men shook their heads but dared not speak loudly. Something felt wrong, but who would be the one to say it? Who would risk standing against the man everyone believed carried divine power? But one woman refused to be silenced, and that was when the real danger began. Her name was Nena, a widow with 3 children. She had given the pastor her late husband's land, believing his words that God would multiply it back to her in double measure. But seasons passed, and nothing changed. Her children grew thinner, her house fell apart, and hunger pressed upon them daily. One evening, she stood up in the church and asked him openly, "Pastor, you said God would return what I gave. Tell me, when will he?" The crowd froze. No one had ever questioned him inside his own pulpit. The pastor's smile faded, and for the first time, his voice carried no gentleness. He told her she lacked faith, that her doubt was the reason her blessings delayed. He warned the congregation that doubt spreads like poison, and that anyone who listened to her would share in her misfortune. Nena left that night with tears in her eyes, but her courage had planted a seed of suspicion. If one person dared to speak, perhaps others would follow. But the pastor had other plans. He whispered threats to those who seemed restless. Traders who questioned him lost his blessing, and suddenly their goods stopped selling. Young men who pulled away found themselves publicly shamed. Fear once again tightened its grip around the village. And yet, even as his power grew darker, a question still hung in the air. Was this truly about money? Was it about control? Or was there something far more dangerous hiding beneath the surface? The questions around Pastor Kelechi did not end with Nena. In fact, they grew louder, though still spoken in whispers. People began to notice strange patterns. His miracles always seemed to happen in shadows. The blind man who claimed to see again was never found walking freely the next week. The lame who stood up on his pulpit returned quietly to their crutches once the crowd had gone. Some said it was all performance, carefully staged to impress those who gave the biggest offerings. Others said the power was real, but not the kind that came from heaven. Men who hunted late in the forest claimed they saw flickering lights deep among the trees, where no lantern should have been. They said they heard chants, low and steady, carried by the wind. At first, people dismissed it as imagination. But when goats and chickens began to vanish from compounds, the rumors grew sharper. Still, the truth remained hidden until the night 3 young men decided to follow him. They had seen him leave the village after midnight, his white robe glimmering in the moonlight. He thought no one was watching, but curiosity is a fire that no warning can quench. Quietly, they trailed behind him, their steps careful, their hearts beating like drums. The path led deep into the forest, where the trees grew so thick that even moonlight struggled to pass through. The young men crouched low, their eyes fixed on the clearing ahead. And there, under the vast sky, they saw what no one had dared to imagine. Pastor Kelechi was not praying. He was standing before an altar of stones, lit with candles. Around him were goats, tied and bleating, and in front of him lay a rooster whose blood stained the earth. His lips moved quickly, not in the name of God, but in words none of the boys had ever heard. The voice they thought was holy now sounded like a stranger's tongue. One of the young men gasped, and the others quickly covered his mouth. But the sound was enough. The pastor's head snapped in their direction, his eyes sharp, searching the shadows. For a moment, silence swallowed the clearing. The boys held their breath, praying he would not see them. Then, slowly, he returned to his chanting, raising his hands over the altar. And in that instant, they knew the truth: the miracles were not heaven's gift. They were bought with blood. The young men fled before dawn, but fear weighed on them heavily. Who would believe such a story? Who would dare speak it out loud? Yet their eyes had seen too much to remain silent forever. And in the days that followed, other signs began to make sense. The sudden deaths of those who questioned him. The sickness that seemed to strike families who refused to give. The way his wealth grew while others starved. All the pieces pointed to the same truth: The pastor's crime was greater than anyone had imagined. An elder, when told the tale, shook his head and said, "When the cloth of righteousness is soaked in blood, even the blind can see the stain. But seeing the stain and cleaning it are not the same." The people of Omote were about to learn that exposing a man of power was far more dangerous than suspecting him. For truth, once uncovered, carries a price that someone must pay. The whispers grew into murmurs, and the murmurs swelled into voices too loud to ignore. The story of what the young men saw in the forest spread from house to house, carried like wind through dry grass. At first, people struggled to believe it. How could the man who prayed for their children, the man who laid hands on the sick, be the same one who spilled blood at midnight? But truth has a way of shining through cracks. Those who once doubted began to connect the pieces: the failed promises, the fear, the sudden deaths, the missing animals. The questions that had long been buried rose to the surface, and soon the village could no longer keep silent. So the elders called for a meeting. Under the great Irako tree, men, women, and children assembled. Even those who rarely showed their faces in public came, for everyone knew the matter at hand was not small. Pastor Kalechi arrived with his usual confident smile, his Bible tucked under his arm, expecting to be honored as always. But the air was different that day. The people's eyes no longer carried trust, they carried suspicion. The eldest among them, Baba Ogunlana, a man whose beard was as white as the moon, stood before the crowd. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced even the restless children. "Pastor Kalechi," he said, "for years we welcomed you as a shepherd. We opened our homes, our hearts, and our purses. But now, questions hang over your head like clouds before a storm. The time has come for truth to step forward. Where do you walk in the night? Whose voice do you call upon in the forest? And why does blood cry from the soil where your feet have stood?" The crowd gasped, for no one had ever spoken to the pastor this way. Kalechi's smile faltered. He raised his voice, trying to silence them with scriptures, declaring that he was being persecuted like the prophets of old. But Baba Ogunlana lifted his staff and replied, "A man who hides behind holy words cannot escape the eyes of those who have seen his deeds. The truth is like smoke, you may cover it, but it will still find its way into the sky." Then, one by one, voices rose. The widow Nena stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, and recounted how she gave him everything and was left in poverty. A traitor spoke of threats whispered to him in the night. And finally, the young men revealed what they had seen under the moonlight: the altar of stones, the candles, the blood. The crowd erupted, some in anger, some in sorrow. The man they had trusted, the man they had called anointed, stood exposed before them. Stripped of his honor, he tried to flee, but the people blocked his path. Some demanded he be cast out at once, others said prison should be his new pulpit. The elders deliberated and declared, "He shall no longer live among us. A shepherd who feeds on his flock is no shepherd but a wolf. And wolves have no place in the fold." And so, Pastor Kalechi was banished from Omote. His name, once spoken with reverence, became a warning to children. His church stood empty, its walls echoing with the silence of betrayal. For a man who carried himself like a king, nothing was more crushing than to be thrown from a throne he built on lies.